Welcome, everybody. See people streaming in. It's lovely to have you with us here. As you may know, my name's Cameron Hepburn. I'm the Badcock Professor of Environmental Economics here at the University of Oxford. And we are, of course, in the middle of New York Climate Week. And this webinar is on the race to accelerate renewables in the global south. And it's, in a sense, an update on work that brings together us as the academic partner, developers, financiers, industry associations, and others. And we have key people here today to discuss where we're up to. Before we do anything else, I want to acknowledge our co-hosts today, which in addition to the Oxford Smith School, who I represent, we've got SSE, one of the world's leading energy companies in a net zero world, and the FCDO, the UK's Development and Foreign Commonwealth Office combined through their Climate Compatible Growth Programme. So I'd like to start by introducing my fellow panelists before I then go on to give you a bit of an outline of where this work's got to, and then we can kick the tires on it with the panel and get you all online engaged too in some key questions about how we scale the deployment of renewables in the global south. So with me today is Gary Singh, who I hope you can see there up on the screen, who is Deputy Director General of IRENA. Gary has extensive experience in this space, having worked for now over 30 years in the field of renewables with policy formation and advocacy in the area. And she's also worked at the federal level of government in the government of India. So we're really looking forward to your contributions today, Gary. They're going to be very important. She comes to us with a background in economics, and who am I to say that isn't a good thing?
Great to be here.
Great, wonderful to have you too. We also have Sam Peacock, the MD of Corporate Affairs and Regulation and Strategy at SSE PLC. Sam, we've been working with for a while. He's a very good fellow, I can assure you, on a personal basis. He joined the Group Executive Committee at SSE in April 2020 and leads on corporate strategy, reg affairs, comms, and various other things as well. He's had a background in power electricity regulation. He's directed government affairs at Ofgem, and has had a bit of policy experience too. So he's also exceptionally well placed to be here. Welcome, Sam.
Thanks, Cameron. Looking forward to it.
Great. Jacqueline Lam is with us, the Regional Director for Asia from SEforALL, so Sustainable Energy for All. I'm sure all of you tuning in will know that, but just in case. She's worked with a variety of different players over the last 17 years, from Boeing, although, of course, we won't hold anything against you for that, Jacqueline, to the Asian Development Bank, to Boeing's perfectly wonderful firm, of course, to the C40 Cities Climate Leadership Group, and has worked in the Ministry of Trade and Industry and the Energy Market Authority at Singapore. So she also has very significant amounts of experience here. And in addition to, perhaps unsurprisingly, a degree in political science from National University of Singapore, she has chosen a fantastic country to do her master's in development studies, and which she acquired from the University of New South Wales in Australia. Now, and finally, and certainly not least, we have Julian Milchrist from the Bank of America. He's Executive Vice Chairman of Global Corporate and Investment Banking, and is a very familiar face and friend to the Smith School. He does a vast amount of work across this area in the energy space, not just in renewables, also in carbon removals, and has been responsible for, wait for it, over $750 billion of M&A transactions over his career so far. And I'm sure that the trillion isn't far off, and we'll get there soon, Julian. So it's very nice to have you here too. So a great combination of capability. Thank you all. So I'm going to do a brief overview of where we are with this work. So I'll just share my slides here and then get into the bit that everybody actually wants to do, which is the discussion, of course. So let me overview the collaboration that we have underway. It's a 3-year research project with SSE exploring clean energy investment in the Global South and looking at it through the lens of the project developer. And the reason for this is that all of these elements are important. The policy is important, the financing is important, the public attitudes and the beliefs, but actually it's the people who are making the project work on the ground that are going to determine whether we succeed or fail here. We did a successful report with SSE last year, launched at COP28, which is actually going to be published in the peer-reviewed journal Climate Policy on rolling out renewables in the Global South, for those who are interested. And we have a report being launched at COP29 at Baku on the renewable energy champions of the Global South. And so today, what we're looking at is some interim work. We've been playing around with some frontier economic and econometric methods on a panel data set to identify which countries within the developing world are outperforming. And then at Baku, we'll be reporting the results of a survey exploring clean energy entrepreneurship. So it's a good research program. The core message perhaps today, and we weren't paid by Heineken, I should clarify, is that energy access around the world no longer depends upon fossil fuels. And those of you may remember Heineken had an ad campaign about it refreshing the places that other beers can't get to. Renewables is to energy as to Heineken is at least allegedly to beer. It's getting into places that fossil fuel-based energy can't reach. And our research and our analysis is showing that actually renewables are now the energy source of choice across the Global South. And partly as a result of that rapid growth, we're actually seeing renewables meeting the vast share of the demand for modern energy. And so we're going to have a first look at some of these trends today. Now, in terms of the numbers, you can see very rapid growth of renewable energy in East Asia and the Pacific and across the other parts of the Global South there. And the point to emphasize is that we'll dig in much greater detail in these numbers when we get to COP29, but it's very, very rapid growth. And if we see how this is playing out right now, so just a snapshot, we've got still quite a variety. And you can see Chile sitting up here at over 400 kilowatt hours per person per annum of solar. And actually, overall, these numbers, while you've seen very, very growth, the takeaway is that these are low numbers. So if you go back to an IEA report from some years ago that I recall, the amount of energy required for a kind of high level of human development back then, the IEA estimated about 100 gigajoules per annum. It's probably gone down a bit as we've got much more efficient with the delivery of our energy services. But my calculations, I mean, it's just a simple conversion. I think that is sitting between 20,000 and 30,000 kilowatt hours per person per annum. So, we're in the hundreds here. We could be getting into the, over 10,000 kilowatts per person. So there's, yes, fast growth, but a long way to go. So if we try and break this down by country, in a sense, it looks very fancy, but it's kind of obvious. The countries with the highest solar penetration are those that have the highest percentage of solar in the energy mix multiplied by the highest power generation per person. It's a simple A times B equals C sort of thing. So these colorful rainbow type curves that you see here are called isoquants, and they reflect the multiplication of the share of solar in the energy mix here. So Namibia way up high there, and the total energy per person here, and the multiplication of those two axes gives you each of these curves. So Chile is again leading the way, as you saw on the previous slide there, because it's furthest out. And so we plotted these for all of the different countries in the different regions. And I mean, one of the interesting features of this is that not everybody is necessarily going in the same direction in terms of their power generation per person. Strikingly here, South Africa has actually gone backwards. which is not really a good thing for the country. But at the same time, it's increased the percentage of solar as the overall consumption per person has fallen. So we picked out 4 countries here to have a look at in a bit more detail. South Africa I just mentioned. Chile's seen this really dramatic increase in the percentage of solar for over the 7 years from 2015 to 2022. And Vietnam and India also very significant increases there. Right, so now let me get into some of the more, in a sense, what we've just shown you here is largely data that we're presenting in ways that are a little bit novel, but not, cutting edge academic research. So I want to just show you some of the things that we're doing in this front. What we're going to try and do here is ask what drives these differences between different countries. Because if you can work out why some countries are going faster than others, maybe there's something we can learn. Maybe there's some lessons that we can apply across to other countries. And so we've attempted to, or I should say we, my colleagues, in particular Lorenzo, has attempted to tease apart the different drivers of the uptake of solar in terms of geography, policy, socioeconomic issues, and so on. And he's used some very clever mathematics-based machine learning to then control for all of those things and then work out which countries are outperforming once you've done all of that controlling. And what we see, interestingly, is that you sort of get a measure of which countries are intrinsically loving solar. Now, that's not a technical term, but what we're interested in is this is the residual after you've controlled for all these different factors. And effectively, the residual is capturing some sort of cultural affinity or some sort of social preference for solar. And what I find striking about this is if you think about anyone you know who has a solar panel on their roof, they may have done it for economic reasons. It may have just been, the smart economic thing to do, often is. But it's also possibly the case that the reason it's there is because they like it. And people sort of like the idea of perhaps it's energy security, perhaps they like being green, perhaps they just like solar panels. And in a sense, I think what this analysis is sort of capturing is what's going on at the macro level when you account for this sort of affinity towards solar. And these solar loving countries therefore have kind of big potential that developers and investors can help them to deliver upon. Because when you invest money in countries where people really like solar, it's going to tend to go a bit further. So yeah, that's the key message. Some countries intrinsically love solar more than others. There are other messages in the work we're doing about the effect of policy and the effect of other drivers on getting solar to be deployed more rapidly. But ultimately, in a sense, we want, if we're going to manage the worst effects of climate change, we need a much more rapid rollout of renewables, which means that we need people to become a bit more sun-loving. And to do that, the same set of 10 actions that we concluded just 10 months ago in the COP last year are just as important today. So we need significant levels of engagement across sectors and to deliver on support for renewables. We need localization, in particular local supply chain capacity and skills. We need a planning regime that is fair and supportive. We need the finance lines, and that's why we've got Julian here and others. One of the perhaps more surprising recommendations was that actually having a set of auction contracts seems to be rather key. It's not surprising if you've been in this area for a while, because it's very obvious that that's been a big driver of success. But if you're coming to this fresh, think, well, why do we want a bunch of auction contracts? It turns out that gives you the stability of the revenues while also driving down the costs for the consumers of your renewables. Obviously, ensuring that renewables are connected to grids. I think Jacqueline maybe don't want to spill any beans, but maybe talking to us a little bit about the significance of all the other costs and elements of getting the supply to the demand side is really, really important. That's number 6 on grid access. We need the models to be right. We need the payment systems to be right. We need to manage risk, especially sovereign risk properly, and currency risk. So those 10 measures remain absolutely important to deploy renewables as fast as possible. So that's it from me. And now the fun bit starts. I mean, I hope those of you listening in learned something from the presentation, but I suspect you'll learn even more from the panel discussion. So I just want to kick off with a quick question to each of the panelists, starting with Gary, if that's all right. So the assessment that I just put forward there is fairly bullish, particularly in terms of solar, although noting that there's a very long way to go. Maybe it was a 7 or 8, I would say, on a scale of 1 to 10. I'm wondering what your own score would be, and in particular, why, more to the point. How do you think we're going?
So Cameron, thanks for a really good presentation. And I really liked the highlights and the outcomes that you brought out. But I would actually put it at a scale of about 6. And the reason I would do that is because although the direction in which it's pointing is right, because you are getting countries that are putting out more solar. But if I look at it from a broader angle, then I think regions, especially like sub-Saharan Africa, where there is an issue of energy access, need much more to be done. And I think that you still don't have investments going in there that would enable that. So I would probably say that while when you compare Chile, then Chile is on a different scale. It's
Right.
really talking to us at a utility scale. And I mean, I can imagine where that 400 kilowatt hour per consumer is coming from.
Yeah.
But pretty much, if I look at solar now, it's no more rocket science. I mean, it's not even rocket science to deploy it on your household. I've seen solar being carried on a bicycle and on a horseback and whatever else, because people have figured out how it can bring more reliable electricity to their homes. But still, solar is not being considered for productive use. And that's where the scale up will happen in developing countries when there is a financing mechanism and also a policy regime that would really push up the productive use, which is agriculture, all the solar pumps and the post-harvest technology that could all do very well with the solar technology coming in. So
Okay.
my sense is that we're still at a lighting level where solar is looking and meeting the lighting needs, and it needs to go beyond.
Yeah, and that I think is borne out in those numbers where we're at hundreds of kilowatt hours a year instead of thousands or tens of thousands. So
right.
Actually, Julian, let me take Gary's point and kind of chuck it to you. She said 6 on the basis that there's not enough being done in sub-Saharan Africa, and in particular, we need more investment, more financing, and using solar for agriculture, for industry, for these larger demand functions. What do you think?
Yeah, look, I'd be in a similar place, I think. I mean, if you've asked me to put numbers on it, I'd be an 8+ in terms of opportunity, but I'd be a 6- or a 5 in terms of delivery and execution at scale. And some of that's down to financing and framing things, as we've just been talking about, and come back to later. I mean, look, you look in Africa, which is where I've spent the most time in the global south. It's like, you've got 60% of global solar resources on most analysis you look at, right, in Africa, but less than 1% is being exploited, right? You look at the opportunity, saying that it's not just solar, but I think also green hydrogen as well. But how do you actually scale that? And in a good sense, I think solar is the place to focus, because it's modular, it's scalable, and the costs have come down dramatically, and it's a proven technology. And again, finance hat on, it's much easier from our standpoint in a developed market than trying to do new technology in a developing market, right? So I think solar's the right place to focus. And I look at some of the countries, no surprise that you've got sort of Chile, as we talked about, but also in Vietnam and Namibia above the line on some of the graphs, where you've got very supportive government frameworks and actually look a more, frankly, more developed banking and track record of banks doing significant business, bigger country limits and so on. So yeah, an 8 on opportunity and a 5 or 6 dependent on how you look at it, I think, in terms of actually how we're scaling and delivering. So.
Okay, fabulous. That makes sense. I can see your reasoning. I'm not wondering whether Jacqueline agrees. Before you express a view, Jacqueline, I just say to the broader audience, I already see 5 questions coming into the Q&A. You haven't jumped the gun. It's fine. They're logged. We'll get to them. We'll just finish with the panel, but it's good to see this level of engagement. So, Jacqueline, what do you think? Would you be more or less bullish than Julian, say?
Thank you, Cameron. I do have to echo both Gary and Julian's sentiments and say that we are, and I'll share a link very briefly outlining our report card really on progress towards Sustainable Development Goal number 7, which is to deliver clean and affordable energy for all. And we are simply not on track to achieve 2030 targets. Gary mentioned the energy access issues that continue to plague the global south. That's true. The silver lining in the report card is as Julian mentioned, the opportunity and the trajectory is an 8. There's been a immense growth in investment towards renewable energy deployment. I think what we do need to unpack is the intricacies of ensuring that the renewable energy deployment reaches, to Gary's point earlier, productive use, where we are seeing, renewable energy deployment being developed in spots where there's large scale hydropower or there is large solar capacity. But these are not necessarily the sites that are close to industrial centers. These are not necessarily the sites that are close to numerous commercial energy intense usage centers. And so therefore the infrastructure needs that come with having to transmit over larger distances and to also with energy storage addressing intermittency of renewables. I think that's where the rest of the economic equation needs to be unpacked so that the renewable deployment is matched by the infrastructure deployment that allows it to therefore reach productive use. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a really important point, Jacqueline. It's obviously not just enough to have your turbines or your generators. They've got to, the supply has to be connected to the demand, and you need a transmission distribution system and storage systems to do that. So that's a very important point, and one that actually feeds very nicely into the thoughts of an operator like SSE, who of course is a player who helps do this sort of thing, among others. So Sam, what are your reflections?
Well, we're kind of European in outlook, so got a bit of a partial lens on some of this. But I'd probably about a 6, and I'm kind of both optimistic and frustrated, probably at the same point as I was reading through it, as I was kind of looking through the report and thinking about it. It kind of reminded me of that book, Prisoners of Geography, where each sort of geographical sort of topography, etc., kind of outlines a country's actions, and with a clean energy lens of whether you've got the Sahara or the North Sea on your doorstep sort of determines how you'll face off into things. I sort of optimistic, I suppose, on the technologies. To Julian's point, solar's there. Offshore wind costs are coming down. There's a lot of opportunity. The technologies feel like they're kind of beginning to emerge. And optimistic on the sort of state actors that you kind of work lets me think that state actors can drive change. There is an impact beyond the sort of geographical point I made. And then probably a bit frustrated on the unevenness of progress, which you'd expect. A little bit frustrated on maybe we're not quite maximizing local developers' potential. That's what kind of jumped out to me. So if you can be optimistic and frustrated on that, Cameron, but I thought it was an interesting contribution to debate. So I'm glad you're moving some of the thinking forward.
Thank you, Sam. Indeed, you can have both of those thoughts in your mind at the same, feelings in the mind, in your body at the same time, thoughts in your brain. And I think somebody famous once said it was the sign of a very developed human who can do that sort of thing. So the future is here already. It's just not evenly distributed, and Sam wishes it were much more evenly distributed. and understandably so. Now, Gary, I just wanted to come back to you. We set out those 10 recommendations, and perhaps I'll put them back up again if I can in a second while you're speaking. And I wanted to get your reaction to them. Sam's expressed some frustration, understandably, that we're not delivering as well as we ought to be. And I'm wondering which of those recommendations you think are likely to be the most important to deliver on the potential that we have here. So there's a reminder, because I'm failing on my tech right now. They are engagement, localization, planning regime, finance, auctions, grid access, service models, payment systems, sovereign risk mitigation, and currency risk mitigation.
So, Cameron, let me start with something I know will not happen in these recommendations, which is the sovereign risk mitigation. And the reason I say that is because of the fiscal space in which most developing countries have is under a lot of constraint. So you will not have governments that have the ability to provide that kind of sovereign risk guarantees. So that's, some more innovative mechanisms would need to be put in place to provide that kind of risk mitigation that private sector developers are looking for. I think finance is extremely important, not just the quantum of finance, but also the cost of capital, because that's what will have a huge impact on the affordability of renewables, while renewables definitely is now the most cost effective. But in many countries, especially the developing countries, the global south, it's the cost of capital that takes them out of reach of communities and people who need them the most.
Right.
And I also think what's important is when we are talking about policy and planning regimes, then most of the focus of ministries of energy is towards the larger utility scale deployment of solar, whereas in many developing countries, the grid, or rather the transmission, is the huge bottleneck. So you can have a generation that pretty much doesn't have where it can go. So, that's a big constraint that many of the developing countries have. And secondly, I think, it's also a question of bringing in the agriculture ministry and the industry ministry into the discussions on how, renewables can be a part of modernizing and providing clean energy to their MSMEs, the medium and small scale industry, and also for productive use in agriculture. So I think let me stop here and really, all of the recommendations made are extremely important. But for me, at the moment, I think finance is very, very critical.
Well, I heard that loud and clear, finance number 4. I also heard kind of grid access and business models as well. But let's stick with the finance and let's turn to Julian. The financiers like you, I often hear saying, we'd love to do this. We'd love to do it at scale. We've got the capital. We just can't find enough projects. Now, often the project developers say we can't find the capital. And I'm just wondering how we intermediate those two kind of statements, because maybe they are both true at the same time, that there is a lot of money willing to go. Maybe the problem is, to Gary's point, that the cost of capital is too high. Maybe the problem is that the projects are there, but they're just not really investable. What are your thoughts on this challenge?
Yeah, no, it's a common thread, isn't it? That's not enough projects, not enough finance, right? And I think I'd frame it rather differently, which is that there's not enough financeable projects if you drive everything on a project finance solution. Maybe we've got time, we can come back to some other more corporate finance kind of answers. So, but I think if you look at the sort of actions or recommendations you had, I mean, several of the things on the right hand side of that slide, whether it's grid access and therefore offtake payment systems, sovereign risk mitigation, currency risk mitigation. Those are all things that I think you need to kind of work together to make a project financeable. It's all about risk allocation and risk appetite. And I think, one of the frustrations probably, I think, for a lot of people is, look, everyone talks about the multi-decade opportunity in terms of the energy transition, and that should mean great returns and therefore maybe greater risk to deliver those returns. But if you box things back to the project finance frame, you then got to say, how do you actually make all the pieces work? And I think, look, some areas where I think there's a lot of interesting things starting to move, and I think there needs to be more of, is actually bringing some of the corporate off-takers in as investors in projects, right? Not necessarily thinking of the best kind of finance investor and the cheapest cost of capital, someone coming in who pays you the most of the project, but having someone who can actually deliver the off-take.
Julian, Jacqueline's been very, very polite and put up her hand, but I'm going to just let her pile in.
No, go for it.
You want to jump on something Julian said there?
Thank you very much. And I just want to also just build on both Julian and Gary's points in terms of risk mitigation. And I'm actually almost reporting live from the Association of Southeast Asian Nations energy meetings that are happening in Vientiane and Laos this week. And one of the key topics this week were the discussions around the ASEAN power grid, which has actually been in the making for over a decade, close to 2 decades now. But it's finally coming into fruition because of market aggregation forces, where we're seeing increased renewable energy demand in renewable energy scarce countries like Singapore, but do have the willingness and ability to invest and to pay for renewable energy deployment and generation. And so we're seeing instances where Singapore is supporting investment in transmission and in renewable energy deployment, all the way from Laos, which is going to be 4 border crossings for the renewable hydropower from Laos to be transferred to Singapore through Laos, Thailand, Malaysia to Singapore, in order to feed Singapore's increasing deployment, for example, of data centers, where the Googles and Microsofts of the world are demanding renewable energy power their data centers. And so we're seeing this level of market aggregation happening in pockets of the global south, where one jurisdiction with the ability, serving as the financial hub of sorts, is actually powering, no pun intended, the renewable energy deployment in the rest of the region. Thank you.
That's really interesting. So Julian, I want to come back to you basically straight away, but in fact maybe with this follow-on question to you, Julian. So Jacqueline's obviously got to have dealt with current country risk there: Laos, Malaysia, Thailand, Malaysia, and not Singapore, but those 3 risks that have somehow been managed there. Do you have a feeling that we're getting on top of managing these sort of sovereign risk issues, or do you still see them as a big blockage?
Well, I think some of those things can be solved, but if you look at, say, an X-Links project that might take Morocco's solar power to the UK, that's potentially great for the UK, but does it do things enough domestically, and how does that shape things domestically? So I think, I think there are those solutions, and I think they're great, but that's why fundamentally it's off-take, whether it's off-take to a better risk country, or, as I said, a kind of corporate investor saying, I'm going to deliver. The other piece quickly, I think, is insurance. I think we're in the middle of 2 or 3 quite interesting workshop sessions with Lloyd's and also a couple of local African insurers, and saying, look, can they actually, through insurance, deliver both a currency risk and manage around that, and also even potentially off-take risk. So I think that's another piece which I think is exciting and interesting in terms of maybe a solution. And the last bit is, you and I have talked about this before, is what you can do with carbon markets, because if you can't find the offtake and the contract to make it financeable, you can find that carbon credit and something that you can also finance against. So those, I think, are the pieces need to come together, and kind of partnerships between carbon credits, carbon markets, insurance, the right people around the table at the project, and the right framework from government.
And are you seeing them come together in some regions of the developing world, or the global south, as we sometimes refer to?
I mean, again, not being project specific, but if you said, look, where are we finding the most engagement at the moment? We're doing a lot of stuff in Kenya, a lot of stuff in Namibia, where again you've got local bank systems out of South Africa supporting you. You've got some interesting people, some local insurers and banks in East Africa, and can we find the right kind of partnerships, including insurance being part of that mix? So yeah.
Okay, I mean, if I was to kind of sum up where we are so far, we know there's a massive opportunity. We know we're nowhere near as far ahead as we perhaps ought to be. We understand what the blockages are. Perhaps it's not so much that there aren't enough projects or there's not enough money. It's the pieces in the middle, the finance structures, the use of perhaps corporate off-takers to manage risk or insurers to manage risk. But another key piece in the middle are the grids and the distribution and transmission networks. Jacqueline, you were emphasizing that a little bit earlier. Sam, as you said, you're a UK European operator, but you've got the firm has great expertise in how to make this sort of thing work. I know you're very reluctant to tell anybody else what to do. It's a very humble approach taken, and I respect that. But let me just tease you out a little bit on it, because I think we've learned some lessons, haven't we, in the UK and in other countries about how to make grid connections work. I mean, maybe we still have a few more lessons to learn, but how to speed up these grid connections and to make the transmission, the distribution system work for renewables, given that they weren't actually really originally designed for renewables. Do you have any thoughts on those questions?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the UK's still got quite a lot of work to be done on this at the moment. So I don't think we're in a great position to lecture the world on grid at the moment. The one thing that I think is interesting and what we're grappling with here, and you can see it in the European conversations, is all around Europe, grid connections have been kind of given on a first come, first served type basis, which has resulted in a kind of just in time type delivery for networks. Really, there's not been a way of letting the networks part of the equation build ahead. So it's always been building behind, always been playing catch up. And it's something that actually what we've found in Europe now is that the countries are beginning to get a grip on how to build the big strategic transmission projects. So they're beginning to realize that you can draw lines on sensible maps and have vaguely good national energy plans. But the bit that people are really, really struggling with is the more localized grid and the distributed part, where you really need communities to be coming together with operators and other different local actors and get that system going. And it's a million small things, not 2 or 3 big ones. And at the moment, if I'm honest, we're really grappling with that one. And you can see people are grappling with that one in all parts of Europe. So I think it's a good story to tell on the big transmission lines, and likewise on things like offshore wind, where we've harnessed the natural resources of the UK pretty well and got good auction contracts in place. But the smaller local stuff, I think, is really, really tricky actually to get that right at the moment. So there's very little to impart from here, I'm afraid.
Okay. Well, let me move 1 minute early, remarkably, to the Q&A session with the wider audience. There's a queue of 11 questions. I'd invite the panelists to just have a look, if you can, scroll through those questions, and if there's anyone you really want to pick up, you can shout. But I wanted to get you going with a question from the person with the elegant name VH37983. And this person has asked, if you had a magic wand to enact instant change, this is for all 4 of you. They've asked what key actions, but I'd like you to give one action. So if you could do one thing to help the developing world rapidly become leaders in renewable energy production usage, what would your one thing be? And as you're answering that one thing, you can be thinking about the other questions there that you want to answer. So Gary, let's start with you. What's your one thing?
I'd actually go with something that Julian has really emphasized, which is managing the off-taker risk.
Okay.
That's I think, in my mind, very, very important for developing countries, but also the developed.
Great. Okay. Off-taker risks, and that's either through a corporate PPA or some other mechanism. Sam?
If you have a magic cost of capital wand, that would obviously be absolutely amazing. And more, to solve the issue that clearly is a very, very difficult one in. I think on one where there might just be a magic wand possible is almost, I'm convinced that having some form of country plan in a lot of the countries on what we actually want to do, what the broad energy resources that are best used for that country are, and actually having that plan. It's taken far too long in UK and parts of Europe to come up with it, and it'd be good. I don't think you can fail with a plan even if it changes, and I still think in a lot of parts of the world we don't quite have that.
Yep. Okay. A national plan. I think you probably can fail with the plan, but anyway. And on the magic wand on the cost of capital, I wonder. It's almost it's a cry to the central bankers of the world. You know, maybe don't lower interest rates for everybody because we don't want to have a massive surge of inflation. But can you just give the clean energy sector a little? Anyway, we can all. You were asked about magic wands, and so fairies are allowed. So moving to Jacqueline.
I would say pricing carbon right, making sure that it's valued in an appropriate way, because I think that is fundamentally where a large amount of revenue is being generated for large carbon emitters, and it's the cost recovery of the emissions is just not sufficiently being addressed through pricing of carbon in whatever form. But yeah, and that will actually enable quite a lot of capital flow if the government were to channel these whether these are carbon taxes or etc. Towards to be able to channel this towards renewable energy investments and the much required infrastructure investments that are very often too large a scale for individual private investors to be tackling. So that would be my one thing.
Oh, sorry, Jacqueline. I didn't mean to cut you off. I want to keep things moving along.
All good.
Okay, great, super. And Julian, it's slightly harder to ask given that you've had 3 magic wands waved already. You're actually kind of 4 because Sam waved his twice.
Yeah, I was going to wave the same one as Jacqueline, but it comes to the same thing, which is moving away from the sort of project finance question for everything, which means the perfect contract around everything from offtakes, everything else, which is what carbon markets could deliver. The other way of thinking about that is, you know, when the mining sector grew the mining sector in Africa, or the oil and gas sector grew the gas sector, they didn't do it all on a project finance basis. They did it on balance sheet. And if we were financing some of the big balance sheets around the world to do things and build a big solar plant, do a big power project, and then refinance it, we could write a check tomorrow to an SSE or someone else for 100 million, 200 million, whereas we'd be still working the project solutions on smaller projects for the next sort of 6 to 12 months and might not get to the answer. So that would be the other one, seeing more corporates deciding to say, we see the return and the opportunity and we'll back it on balance sheet and refinance it, project finance afterwards.
Always good to see potential deals being discussed on a Smith School webinar there. So Julian and Sam, I hope you'll get together afterwards. And actually, Julian, you may be the man of the moment, because Katambi here, based in Zambia, is willing to have detailed discussions with you, he says, and he shares his contact details. So there you go. I'll leave you all to
We've done a rights issue once in Zambia, so we can engage on that online.
Very good. So while you think about deals, I'd like to hear your thoughts on floating offshore wind. So this is Ben Parsons' question. Is this just a developed rich country thing? We're going to stick it in the North Sea and off Japan and maybe out in the east of the States, or is there a significant role for floating offshore wind in lower and middle income countries? And this also, I think, gets to Stella Jobs' question, which is, why are we only talking about solar here? And Stella, of course, you're right, a mix of renewables is where we're heading, and that is better. But floating offshore wind, any of the panelists want to take a stab at that one? Yeah, Sam? Gary? Sorry.
Yeah, I just want to say that this is something, for example, Japan is considering. And the reason that they're considering this is because they have very deep seabeds.
Right.
So that's, an option for them. But it's also an option for, those islands which are subject to, hurricanes and all, where you can actually, bring them into a position that won't damage them. But I guess Sam is the best placed for answering this.
Well, he's certainly got some
Partially.
offshore wind turbines sitting behind him, but they look pretty fixed to me, not floating. But Sam, what are your thoughts?
I mean, it's the early stages on it. I mean, I think the potential is absolutely huge. Japan's a great example from Gallery. We're trying to actually do a sort of demonstrator project over there with some partners over there, Marubeni, which I think is exciting. I think what it sort of feels to me though is the technology that you're seeing for the floating part still seems to be a few varieties kicking around. So it feels there's a little bit further to go down the curve before you get to more standardized piece. Hopefully we can do that pretty quickly. To me, it feels something we should be deploying pretty hardcore in the next decade, but we've probably got 5 or 6 years to just drive out the technological improvements. But that's kind of where we are on it. We've got a bunch of projects in Scotland which we're hoping to deliver, and I'm sure we'd like to do it earlier, but it just feels there's a little bit more technology to drive through on that, and then hopefully we can make a real impact globally, actually, to the point of the question.
Yeah, exactly. I was just going to kind of put some words in your mouth, Sam. And Ben was asking about lower and middle income countries. And effectively, you're saying we're going to sort out the tech. The rich countries can take the hit and take the risk and work that through. And then perhaps we scale it internationally. I mean, maybe there is some learning to do in lower and middle income countries too. You get these sort of lean innovation models where actually the tech transfer goes the other way. Julian, Jacqueline, either of you like to comment on floating offshore wind?
I mean, the only thing I pick up on briefly is Sam's comment. I think just from a financing standpoint, I don't think the technology is kind of locked down and it does need further work. So yeah, echo what you said.
Just to add that there isn't one formula that would suit all the countries, and what we typically do is look at each country context and recommend the least cost deployment solutions based on the income levels, the ability to raise capital, etc. And I think to Sam's point earlier, I think given the variables and variety of offshore wind technology being kicked around right now, I think especially where we want to accelerate deployment in higher risk, low income jurisdictions, it would make the most sense in the immediate term to look at the least cost, most tested and tried technologies. Thank you.
Great. I'm going to turn slightly cheekily to a question from Alana at SSE, and it's for you, Sam. So it's a kind of internal SSE discussion on display here. The question is, why is it important, or perhaps is it important, for global developers to be part of this discussion? So should we leave this to different local developers in different countries, or is there, in the oil and gas space, we have these big international oil companies who move their technology around the world and get things done that way. Do you have a view on that?
So personal view is, I think it's about, we started this project with the Smith School, really about trying to think about how you can encourage local champions. Energy primarily, to me, feels like a localized game. You want to create local champions, local supply chains, etc. So I think, and I'm not quite sure in oil and gas if that was necessarily done in the right way. And I think we've got an opportunity in clean energy to try and do it in a slightly different way. I think we want to be part of the debate because we see ourselves as a local champion in the UK and Ireland. And we're interested in how you can unblock some of those barriers to making local champions in some of these countries where we wanted to work with SEforALL and others who've got a much better footprint over there, and you guys, because you've got much better brains. So I think there's a role in the debate for it, but I personally think energy is more of a localized game, and we should be trying to. That's why we're in it. But
I wonder if others would disagree. Do come in and tell Sam we need him to go global.
Well, maybe it comes back to my earlier point. I think from a financing standpoint, us following the big balance sheets and corporates, whether it's their corporate arms doing venture or as themselves on balance sheet doing projects, will mobilize more capital faster. I agree with Sam. You then got to work out what's the right end game you're trying to deliver, because you want it to be ultimately local. But in terms of actually making stuff happen, I wouldn't underestimate the power of having some big corporates driving things, or at least their venture arms.
And do you see a sort of a potential partnership model? I'm partly wondering if Jacqueline's seen this as well, or Gary, where you have a combination of local and global players working together here.
Absolutely. And I think this is also where, to a large extent, the transition finance and the taxonomy around that comes into play as well, given that in many parts of Asia there are slightly different definitions of sustainability-linked loans, for example, slightly different taxonomies that are being considered, which therefore then enable local or regional developers to have a bit more access to the market, and then where the global developers are able to value add through efficiency improvements, etc. They are definitely part of the picture as well.
Let me also come in here with just giving you a trend that in the sector, in renewable energy sector, the way we are seeing this move forward, which is very different from fossil fuels and the centralized kind of deployment that we saw, the large baseload plants that got done in thermal and others, is that the state's not so active. I'm in the thermal plants and the gas plants in most of the developing countries, it was the state that really owns these assets. Here, the trend is that 70% of the sector is really being driven by private sector. So and I've seen it in many countries where it starts with the local entrepreneurs who are much more who have the ability to take on the risk, and the country risk and off-taker risk for them is they can take much more than global players can. And as the market grows in those countries, then you see a partnership that gets developed between the local entrepreneurs who've also grown in that space and with global developers coming in.
Okay, thanks, Gary. I'm wanting to kind of extend this question a little bit and go a little bit wider, building on a question from Matt about supply chain and rising price issues. In a sense, a lot of this supply chain for clean energy is pretty international. They're longer supply chains with outputs that we describe in Oxford as having a more significant trophic depth, so much more fish eating more fish, except in an industrial sort of sense. And what that means is that barriers to trade arguably hit this space a bit harder. And we're in a world that has been, I mean, the rhetoric, at least, around the trade regime is getting more and more negative, even as we see increasing volumes of international trade in practice. And so Matt's question is, well, if prices are rising and we've got these supply chain issues, is this going to be just going to make things even harder for the developing world to develop their own natural, very strong renewable resources in terms of their own insulation and their own wind resources? Anyone have a reflection there? Are you seeing trade slowing things down?
Maybe I'll jump in here
and
talk about how this is actually the trade barriers going up is actually providing an impetus for the Global South to look at developing their own local or regional value chains around renewable energy manufacturing. And I'll pop in the chat box in a little while our 2 publications on Africa renewable energy manufacturing opportunities, as well as Southeast Asia renewable energy manufacturing opportunities. And these are really where you see the Global South start to look at where its comparative advantages are, especially given that they are already, significant global suppliers of critical minerals, for example, and how that plays into the larger part of converting existing internal combustion engine assembly lines into electric vehicle or electric two-wheeler assembly lines, etc. And the kind of green transition and green jobs creation that creates in the Global South as well. Thanks.
Super. And Gary, I'm being a bit cheeky here, but I've heard some chat about the Indian government, and I know you have been working in that space, effectively preferring Indian-made panels to Chinese-made panels, and perhaps that, is that going to actually push the price up of solar in India? Is this a sensible policy to build out a local supply chain, or is this just slowing things down? What do you think?
I do have to say that when this whole solar mission started off, there was a 30% local content conditionality, which got dropped along the way. And now, one is realizing that you do need a diversified supply chain with many more countries having the manufacturing base to be able to supply not just for domestic but also internationally. And I think it's when you're looking at the energy space, you have to look more medium to long term. So it might, while the capacities are getting built in terms of manufacturing, it might lead to a slight increase in the tariffs because it gets reflected as tariffs. But my own sense is that the manufacturing capacities are getting built really fast and at gigawatt scale, which means it's a good addition, because in energy transition globally, you will need much more of solar panels that come to you with diversified supply chains.
Super. Julian and Sam, any thoughts on the trade and supply chain piece? No worries if not. We're starting to run out of time anyway. Julian?
I've got one.
Yes, Sam.
Well, it's just a quick one. I was just thinking, when I was thinking about it, the general sort of protectionist vibe we've seen in some parts of this area, I don't think is overly helpful. You've almost, I think, you'd use a developed world example. The US offshore wind experience hasn't been as smooth as it could have been if there'd been a more diverse supply chains approach. And I feel that hasn't particularly helped, and sort of the positive attempts and things like the IRA do have some consequences which don't always play out. I wouldn't have thought you'd see it as much in solar for the reasons I think that Gary touched upon, but I can certainly see it not helping, particularly in offshore wind.
Okay, fair enough. So look, we've still got a bank of 7 questions here, which, with apologies to those who've asked them, we won't be able to get through. But just I'm going to give the panel a chance to make a quick closing point each. And before I do that, just say if you're able to address any of these questions in your closing point, that'd be very welcome. So we've got a question on RECs, and can we use RECs here? So renewable energy certificates. Can we use corporate offtakes, which has been discussed a little bit, but could we use Western players and their own commitments, either to Scope 2 or other SBTI sort of commitments, Google and Amazon here usefully? There's one about research questions, which is probably more for me, I suspect, but I'm just moderating, not speaking. One on hydro power, is it good? One on PPAs again, and one on how can we incentivize the West to invest more in renewables in the developing world. And finally, one detailed question on some elements of the South African landscape. So in the order that we began, closing reflections and any answers to those open questions would be very welcome. Gary, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, thanks. I think this question about corporate PPAs is very important, because we need to expand the constituency of how renewable energy can get procured. And the question talks about Amazon, and I think that's a great example. If at the global level, Amazon has decided to go green in a time frame, right now their thinking is that they would actually do the deployment in the countries that they get the maximum revenues from. But if there was an innovative way of them also getting in as an off-taker in some of the developing countries, I think that would really push the bar to getting much more renewables in the global south.
Right. No, it's good to see you got a thumbs up from somebody there. So we're basically at time. So Julian, see if you can sum up in 30 seconds.
Look, echo the offtake point. You heard me say that earlier. I think there's a lot more corporates can do in that respect. The wider point, I think, is just we're only going to get there with the right partnerships. And I think people talk about, hey, look, the answer is blended finance, but that is going to be the answer. But it needs to be the right projects where people are managing risks, where there are problems, right? Which goes to insurance, it goes to carbon markets, goes to offtakes, and being creative around that, finding new partnerships. That's, I think, the punchline for me. And there's lots to do.
Good message of collaboration. Jacqueline?
building on the point of partnerships, looking inwards on national level partnerships, there needs to be a whole of government approach. As Gary mentioned earlier, it's not just about the decarbonizing the power sector, it's about coordinating your investment regulatory framework. It's about making sure that your trade framework allows for the renewable energy imports that are so desperately needed, and at competitive prices without tariffs, being a major obstacle. So this whole of government approach to the energy transition is going to be the key way for governments to look at planning and policy development around just energy transition in a comprehensive way. Thanks.
Thanks, Jacqueline. And I think, Sam, one of your wand waves was the national plan point, which Jacqueline's picked up on there. But do you want to have the final word?
Just very briefly, thanks, Cameron, for hosting. Thanks, everyone, for their time. It's just on the hydro point in there. Just reminded me of Jacqueline's good closer there. We need all the technologies. Hydro can be done in a responsible way. I don't know about that particular project, but it absolutely can. And unlocking all of the technologies is going to be absolutely critical. But thanks to everyone for their time today.
Well, what a great discussion. Thank you all. We will reconvene, as it were, in COP29, where we will be releasing the work that we're currently doing. Much more granular look we're going to have descriptive statistics on over 800 clean energy startups across Africa and South Asia, and a couple of dozen, even more than that, interviews across the board to really get a detailed picture of the dynamism, the investment, and the activity in the clean energy champions of the Global South. But thanks to our fantastic panelists. Thanks to you, the audience, for some very sensible questions. Apologies to those who didn't get their questions answered. We look forward to welcoming you back here on another occasion in the future. Thanks very much.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Thanks.